Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisris, Perek Beis, Halachi Gimel. We are learning today Daf Tez Zayin, starting all the way on top of the Amid by the new Mishnah. Before we're going to learn the Mishnah, I'm going to read again the Rambam in Hilchos Maiser, Perek Gimel, Halachi Gimel, and we're going to go backwards from the Rambam into the Mishnah, and that will for sure give us a greater appreciation both of the Mishnah and of the Rambam. So in Hilchos Maiser, when the Rambam is going through, as we had also in the Seder of Mesechtes Maisris, that first we spoke about the Oinas HaMaisris, prior to which there's Bechlal no obligation, even when harvested, because it's not Oichel. The Rambam does the same Seder. So after he explains the Oinas HaMaisris minimum amount of development, then we speak now about the last step, which is called the Nigmar HaMalachton. And the Rambam writes like this, that I'm beginning, Halacha Aleph, Oinas HaMaisris, once produce, any produce, reached their minimum amount, let's say the third, and Vinitlishu, and it was harvested, but Va'adayin loy Nigmar HaMalachton, but the work preparing it either for sale or for eating it at home is not yet fully completed with the examples that Rambam gives. Such produce, mutar lechoil mehem achilas arai, one can snack from them. At shetigamer melachton. On the other hand, umisha tigamer melachton, once that product reaches that critical stage of gemar melacha, whatever event will define Gemar Melacha, from then onwards, prior to tithing, Asur Lechol Mehen Ara, you cannot even snack from it. Now, guys, appreciate what we're saying now. Halacha Beis. Bamed Varam Amurim, the above is only true when a person was Goimer Peiroisav, when you did a Gemar Melacha, with the intent of Lemachran Bashuk, to sell them in the market. But if you intend to take them home, even after shenigmar melachton, but there's going to be another event, or really midrabanan, six potential events. Each one will be koivei ala maisras. And then the Rambam writes in Halacha Gimel, the echad mishisha devarim koivei ala maisras. The following six will establish what we're going to call now the kvius. Now it's established. Habayis, what we call Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, Hamekach, which will be the second topic of the Mishnah, all the way to the end of this Perek. The sale itself will be Koivei ala Maisras, Veho'esh, we learned that before, putting it on fire, the Hamelach, salting it, the Hatruma will be the first topic of today's Mishnah. If someone separated the Trumais, that's it. Now you can't even have Achilas Arai, or Shabbos, which we just learned yesterday, as we learned above as well. Now, appreciate what the Rambam is saying. Whoever's coming on right now, this is critical for the whole daf today.
Oh, that was 5. I'm sorry. What was the 6th?
Bayis, Mekach, Eish, Melach, Truma, Shabbos.
Okay, I apologize.
Bayis, Mekach, Eish, Melach, Truma, Shabbos.
I need coffee, sorry.
You need coffee. I also need coffee. Now, the greatness of the Rambam is that he mentions all of these 6. Achar shenigmar malachton. Remember this key word. In other words, the Rambam is saying that you have to have oinas hamaisres, minimum, harvest it. Gemar melacha, if you're selling it in the shuk, that's it. You can't have arai. If you have gemar melacha, but you're planning to take it home, you still can eat arai. What now will be koiveya? Echad mishisha devarim. The Rambam, now we'll see, all of this is a development. That's the Rambam's psak. I'm going to just open up the whole daf today. What were to happen if any one of these shisha devarim happens before Gemar Melacha? Right? The Rambam doesn't position it there. Could we say that whether all of them, whether some of them are so potent, they add chashivus to the produce to the level that even though there isn't an objective gemar melacha, nevertheless, you separated truma. which will be the first machlokas of our Mishnah. Whether the separation of Truma perhaps will be koivei alamaisreis even prior to Nigmar Amalachton. That will be a machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. That's one big topic of the Mishnah. And the second big topic that will begin today, like I mentioned, and it will go until the end of the Perek, will be one of the Shisha, which is Mekach. Amazing. So in the Seder, in other words, the first one that Rambam mentions is bias. Just for the record, that Re'iyas Pnei HaBayis is a biblical event. Biblical event. The other Chamisha from the Shisha are rabbinic laws. Good to know that. There's going to be consequence. The Seder of the Rambam, maybe it's from the Brais, I don't remember. We read the Brais a couple of dav back. After bias, he writes Mekach. I'm just saying that in our Mishnah, the first topic will be Truma, the second topic will be Mekach. Truma will be limited, and that's the end of that. Mekach will begin here, and the next Mishnah will continue to speak about Mekach. By Truma, I really hope people chap this. The Rambam positions the Shisha Devarim that are koiveya after the Gemar Malacha. We're going to begin discussing not all six together. It's going to be Truma and Mekach, but the topic of Truma will be whether Truma will be koiveya lamaisres even prior to Gemar Malacha. We're going to speak about Mekach. Just interestingly, for those who remember in Bava Kama, Daf Pei Beis, Amid Beis, the Gemara says that there were 10 rules that we made regarding Yerushalayim. One of them is that one is not allowed to have ginois nor pardesois in Yerushalayim. We're speaking about the old city, the walled city. The Gemara there in Bava Kama says because when people have these beautiful gardens and orchards, sometimes plants rot, there's a bad odor. Sometimes they have to be fertilized. That creates a bad odor. It was in order not to create a bad odor in Yerushalayim, but because of the Ketores, and we'll speak it out more in details when we get to the Gemara, that there was one ingredient that was needed that comes from roses, that the Chachamim Dafka, from the times of the Nevi'im, there was one rose garden in Yerushalayim. And you see from our Gemara that once you had a rose garden, they chapped it on and they planted a couple of fig trees there. And they charged a fortune for those figs. These Yerushalmis, because it came from the Vesach, it came from the rose garden, and from this, and from the Toiras comes. The kid said, you pay the price for that. And it's a very cute, just to throw it on the side over here. There's going to be a big topic today, whether the separation of Meiser Rishon will also be koivei ala maisros as Truma does. Now that question, a big part of today's shir is going to be to clarify the question. Let me tell you why the question is a problem. Because biblically, you have to separate the Truma Isu Maisros on the order. First Truma Gedoyla, then Meiser Rishon, then Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani. You're not allowed to go out of the order. So when the Gemara is beginning to ask, well, will the separation of Meiser Rishon also establish a kvius lemaisres that you can't eat achilas arai? I mean, if you did it Allah Seder, that means you took off Truma. The Truma did it. So we're speaking about what someone who went out of the order. We're not going to like to have a topic about someone who sinned. What will be the din? Even though sometimes you have to discuss what do we do. But the Gemara is not going to have that discussion over here. So we're going to find a scenario where one will be able to separate Meiser Rishon in a way where you are not violating the Isur Doiraisa of going out of the Seder. On the other hand, the Truma that was separated is for sure going to be ineffective. And yes, we're going to discuss whether Meiser Rishon has the same koyach as Truma does, which will be to be koiveya la Meisres. I also want to say that all of this will be connected to the Gemar Melacha. All of this will be connected to what is the intent of the owner with his product. So if you have figs, is your intention to have them the way they are, fresh? Is your intention, we learned so much about, to put them in the round cake, face to beat them into the barrel? Are you going to dry them out? And how the kavana of the owner is going to be very consequential. And we'll leave it at that. And let's right away go inside. So says the Holy Mishnah, and the whole line, already beautiful. You see where the Rambam, the one of the six, the separating of Truma, which has the koyach to say, you separated truma, that's it. No more eating, even as a snack. Okay, but what happens if you separated truma? And just for the record, the Gemara is going to go into greater detail. What does it mean? Now, Gemar Malacha, just by grain. What's the Gemar Malacha by grain? The meruach, right? The smoothing of the pile. Well, actually, Nigmar Malachtan can be before you smooth the pile. Actually, Nigmar Malachtan can mean that you just harvested the grains and you didn't even separate the kernel from the chaff. Many, many, many steps are needed. We will see in the Gemara that at some point, lekula alma, separating truma will be ineffective. We're going to limit this actually nigmar malachtan to where there's only few and objectively, halachically, minimal tasks that are needed to get to the Gemar Malacha, as we'll define in the Gemara. So there's a
Rabbi.
Yes.
Just a quick question. With everything else, when it's done and you haven't yet separated your trumas, so it's called tevel. So what does it mean that you separated truma and then it's still tevel? Is it because you haven't taken meiser?
Thank you. Okay, so let's go back. So even though there will be times that when someone aviv separates truma, Chazal will use the word that the product is mesukan, but it will be self-understood that it's mesukan from truma, but it's still tevel vis-a-vis the obligation of meiser rishon and meiser sheni or meiser ani. Which means that once this concept is being triggered, now that this happened, you can't have arai. Okay, what needs to happen for me to be allowed? And by the way, allowed would be even keva. You know what? When you separate all of the trumas and maasros, and I'll tell you even more than that. That was the mistake of the Amaratzim. That if someone only separated truma gedolah, and if someone now will eat from what's remaining, he'll be chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. And the emes is, if the person separated the meiser rishon, which has in it the trumas meiser, even though he's not allowed to eat it, because you didn't separate meiser sheni or meiser ani, then you won't be chayiv misa b'dei shamayim, but you're not allowed to eat it. So the levels of isur, the punishment shifts. But the obligation, midoiraisa, is to separate all of the maasros. I hope this made it clear. Okay.
We've discussed many times oinas hamaasros. There's oinas hamaasros, and there's gemar malacha. Let's leave oinas hamaasros.
So oinas hamaasros, let's go back. Oinas hamaasros means that if someone harvested any product when it wasn't mature enough, that halachically what you harvested is not called oichel, there is no obligation to tithe it either. That was the first part of the Masech. Now we're speaking about hit to oinas hamaasros. You harvested it. So let's follow. So there's the Gemar Malacha, the way the Rambam formulates it. And then if you are planning to take it home, even though it had a Gemar Malacha, you are still allowed to eat arai until it's going to become established. The kvius lemaisros. What's koivei lemaisros? Echad meshisho dvarim. Now the Rambam puts truma. He paskins like one of these tanaim. He's already paskening. Also, only achar shenigmar malachta. But here we find by the tanoim that truma might be so potent that even though you did not do gemar malacha, if someone decided, I'm going to be toirem, now that you began, you can't stop in the middle. Now, Danny, you have to be ma'aser, ma'aser rishon, and ma'aser sheni yorani. And indeed, the Rabbi Eliezer, he's machmer. He says that even though shaloi nigvan amalachton, oiser meloichal mehem aray. In other words, the koyach of truma to establish the maasros is even for produce shaloi nigvan amalachton. Clearly, the Rambam does not paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. Shamutahi. The Chachamim are matir. Okay, the Chachamim are matirim. Now, look inside the Rashirilio, Farvos, he says Gavaldik. 3 lines from the top in the right column. Mirash, the Chachamim matirim, the Kusavri, they hold the Ein Truma Teveles. The word Teveles means koivaas. That the Ein Truma Teveles, Yoisim Sharabayas. Can't, we said that bias is Doiraisa. The other 5 of the 6 is the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan are Masakin Ke'en Doiraisa. They're not going to go beyond the Doiraisa. Just like the Iyas Pnei Habayis. The Chihecha the Ein Shar Habayis Toivel Ele Benigman Malachtoi. If someone takes home produce that didn't even have Gemar Malacha, just because they took it into the house, they will not be Chayiv They will not. It's not a nikva'as, and therefore you can still have aray. So kach truma einoi tevelas ela bedavar shenigvan malachtam, which means look at the chiddush of Rabbi Eliezer, that the separating truma is stronger than the iyas b'nei habayis. Now, a detail which is very important, even though the chachamim generally are lenient, but the chachamim give an exception, and they say chutz mikalkolas hate'enim. There's one exception. The one exception is that when a basket of figs that did not reach their final stage, why not? As an example of it, do you remember? If you're living in a place where when people harvest the figs, not only did they put it in the basket, but they covered it with leaves, then the covering it with leaves, that is the Gemar Malacha. Okay, I'm living in that place. I am living in that place. And I didn't cover it with leaves, but it's already in the basket. Or even in a place where you don't cover it with leaves, you remember the Mishnah says you have to fill the basket. I didn't fill the basket. The basket is half full. Nevertheless, the Chachamim will be moided that if at this point, even though it's not the Gemar Malacha, a person decided to be Toidem, that is Megala. You know what that proves? I'll tell you the logic. You know what that proves? That this Jew right now is not going to harvest any more figs. I'll tell you why. Because if I have a basket of it and I separate and I only filled it up half, and then I decided to separate Truma, what were to happen if I would put more figs in the basket? I'm going to make a balagan. Why? Because I'm not allowed to be toidem from something that's already tithed, min aptur, on that which is not tithed yet. I'm not allowed to do that. So the very fact that I'm toidem, that becomes the Gemar Malacha. That means that this person is done for this go. That's why the Mishnah also said then that if I plan to fill 3 baskets, even filling 2 baskets, it's not a Gemar Malacha. The Gemar Malacha is that when I finished picking the figs for this time, the act of Truma shows that I finished picking for this time. So it does 2 things at the same time. It makes the Gemar Malacha, and now there's Truma. That's a logic behind the Chachamim. Now another thing which is good to know, At kan, that Truma is echad mishisha dvarim. We're going to learn in the Mishnah, the Tana, Rab Shimon, that disagrees with the whole Truma. He doesn't hold that Truma has the koyach to be koiveya lemaisres. He disagrees with the whole thing. Let's read it inside. And he Dafka uses this example, that kalkol las te'enim, that shetrama, Rab Shimon is mater, and we'll see clearly in the Gemara, Rab Shimon is mater for the record, not only when the kalkala was not full or not covered, not only because of the fact that the figs did not yet have prior to the Truma Gemar Malacha. No, Rab Shimon argues even when there is a Gemar Malacha, I don't agree, Rab Shimon says, that Truma is going to be koiveya. If I'm planning to take it home, Pnei Abayis is going to be koiveya. All right, Shabbos will be koiveya. He agrees to the other ones. He disagrees with the Truma. And the Chachamim aser, and again, when do they aser? Even when loy nigmar malachta. There's a question, why did the Mishnah have to repeat the Chachamim Moisrim when we just had before, right? The Chachamim are matirin chutz mikalkolas te'enim, and we'll leave that for the Gemara. Okay, so now we concluded the first topic, which we're going to go back. The whole Gemara today will be about the first topic, but now we're going to open up the second topic that will last until the end of this chapter, and that is another one of the Shisha Devarim, the second one that Rambam mentions, Mekach, Habayis HaMekach. Okay, some of these details we already quoted above. Says the Mishnah, if a person tells his fellow, Heilach Isser Zeh, take this coin called an Isser, the same boy chomesh te'enim, and give me 5 te'enim. And by the way, Aviv, let's go with Reuven and Shimon. Reuven was the owner, right, last week. Let's leave Reuven as the owner. So Shimon is the buyer. Shimon gives Reuven a Isser, and Shimon tells Reuven didn't even pick the figs off the tree yet. B'chlal, it's not shayach it's not subject on any level. You can't be Treidim Ma'asan on the tree. He tells them, go pick for me 5 figs. So the din will be is that when the seller, let's say the Reuven, will pick the 5 figs, the very fact that he picked it for Shimon, and he didn't pick it for Shimon as a gift. Remember that? The gift, lav dafka, matana eina kemecher, according to many opinions. But he picked it because he got money for it. That's called a sale. So the fact that these 5 figs were sold, those 5 figs may not even be nashtan, achilas araid on. Why? Why? Because he bought it. Because Shimon bought it. Lo yoichal at all. Not even aray. At sheyaser divrei Rabbi Meir. This is important. In other words, Mekach establishes. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't disagree with the principle that Mekach establishes. Mekach establishes. And by the way, another detail, going back to the Rambam. Again, the case of the Mishnah of Mekach, there's no Gemar Malacha. Gemar Malacha by figs is filling and covering the basket, right? Make it clear. And we just had that before by Truma, that we make an exception by figs. But just to keep open how the Rambam B'koichai like categorize things differently. You learn the Mishnah, you see this is not the normal Gemar Malacha. Fakert. He paid for it when it was still mechuber to the tree. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the principle, but we had this Rabbi Yehuda before. Rabbi Yehuda says that if the way Reuven gave Shimon his 5 bought figs was not that he gave it to him altogether, or at least 2 at a time. No, but he gave it to him one by one. There was never 2 together, not in the hands of the buyer, not in the mouth of the buyer. He had a fig. When he finished eating fig number 1, Reuven went back to the tree and he picked another fig, gave him another fig. Don't forget, remember, figs is the only fruit that's not all ready at the same time. You don't harvest the tree of figs. You harvest only that which is ripe. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, if oichel achas, then even though there was mekach, not this mekach goes into the echad mishisha devarim, then you can still have aray. Interesting logic. So 1 second, let's do words. We had these words before. Ve'im tziraf or tzireif, if you combined, which would mean only 2, not all 5. He was given 2 or more. Or even if he gave the buyer 1, but the one, Shimon didn't eat it. He held on to 1. Then he got the other. Now he has 2. Now he has 2. Now, yes. Now Mekach establishes, if it's only 1, he is allowed to eat aray. Interesting. Yes.
Yeah, Rabbi, the Mekach
One second, Kevin. One second. Yes, I do.
Does the buyer have to have fluid intent, or even if the picker has fluid intent?
Okay, I don't know to answer. Just want to say Aviv wants to know what happens if Reuven had 2 together and he only gave to Shimon 1 at a time. I don't know the answer to that. I'll look into that. I don't know who has to do the tziruf. I don't know, but that's a good question. That has to be clarified. Yeah, Kevan.
So the Mekach here is only for the 5 he picked because they're figs. But if it was a different kind of tree, the Mekach would be for the entire tree?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. In other words, you're bringing up what I brought up. In other words, the fact that the Mishnah gives an example of figs, the chiddush of the Mishnah, which we wouldn't get from only learning the Rambam, because when you learn the Rambam says that Mekach only works achar shenigmar malachtan. Here, There's no gemar malacha, but maybe figs don't need gemar malacha. So Kevin wants to know, what about apples?
Exactly.
I don't know yet either. It's amazing. It's amazing how the Rambam knew everything to categorize. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is going to bring a proof, because you can argue with Rav Meir. He's not arguing with Rav Meir. He's moida that Mekach is koiveya. But who told you 1-1? Where did you get that from? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maisa beginas v'rodem shoyse v'Yerushalayim. And just like we mentioned, just a couple in our words of introduction, this is Bava Kama Pei Beis Asada Dvarim Nemru b'Yerushalayim. One of them is Ein Oisen Ginois Upardesois b'Yerushalayim, and the Gemara there in Bava Kama says Mishum Sircha. Like I mentioned, Sircha means for a foul odor. That's what it means. But they also needed to have the ingredient for the ketoidas, known as, let me see over here the name of that. It's going to come to me, or I'm going to see it. One of the two.
Kippas hayarden.
Kippas hayarden. We say this every day, and the kippas hayarden, because of us needing the kippas hayarden, which comes from a rose garden, they allowed. The Gemara says from the times of the earlier Nevi'im for there to be one rose garden. So you would think a rose garden is where you grow roses. No, they also grew other things. Another detail, roses are very delicate. This also explains a detail of the Mishnah. So the owner of that rose garden, the Groise Mensch, who was a chaptarain and planted, because you can't plant orchards, but he had a rose garden, so he got a heter to plant a couple of figs. The figs were a big deal. No one was allowed to enter that garden to pick the figs because they were afraid that when they pick the figs, they're going to ruin the roses. So that's just some background, that whoever bought figs from that garden, Dafke bought it in a way where the seller was the one that picked it. He took it out of his garden and he gave to the buyer whatever it is that he bought. So that's the story. Maise beginas v'rodon shoyse b'Yerushalmi. The te'enim were very chashuv. You can see that from the price. Normally, one iser would buy you 20 figs, just for the record. Okay? And here you only got 5, which was the example the Mishnah gave above. Just it was yakir, it was expensive. And what happened was everyone wanted to get those figs. The seller made a killing. People bought from it. No one ever was toidem uma'aser. Why is that? Because the seller would give to the buyer 1 fig at a time. Also, when something is more chashuv, that's the way you present it. If you give a whole bunch at one time, feels cheaper. When you pay a fortune to only get 5 and not 20, and you don't even get the 5, you get 1 at a time, you would think that the buyer would not want it. The buyer would want it more now. Now, how can v'loy he trishu memenu trumo meiser ba'olam? But 1 second, but mekach is koiveya. Must be, that's the Rabbi Yehuda's raya. Mekach is koiveya. But whenever you are eating it 1 at a time, then mekach is not koiveya. Beautiful. We're going to come all back to this, but now let's begin. And the Gemara, like I mentioned, the Gemara today is going to focus on the first machlekes we had in the Mishnah, that Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that Truma is koiveya even actually nigmar malachton. But says the Gemara, manan kaimen. What are we talking about over here? Let's define something that's not nigmar malachton. Im bekalkala shel te'enim. First of all, the opening case of the Mishnah, Vadai, will not be talking about figs. And I want to just say something about figs. The reason why it would be advantageous to speak about figs, because by figs, you can have the fig fully ripe, but the owner is planning to dry it out. So the last step needed is to dry it out. That can be one hechatimsa where it's actually nigmar malachton, but the fig is already a fig. That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for actually nigmar malachton, that it's so many steps back, as we'll see. Even there, Rabbi Eliezer will be moed that Truma doesn't do anything. So you cannot give me the case of the figs, because it happens to be that even the Chachamim are moed, that was the Mishnah, the Chachamim are moed by a kalkala shel te'enim, that if you are toidem it, even actually nigmar malachton, the example we gave is you only filled up a half a basket. Everyone is moed that the event of Truma is koiveya. But, so what will be the case? I bezeisim al hashemen or anovim al hayayin, which would mean, we'll teach it, that if a person harvested olives, but the olives are designated for its oil, or the grapes are designated for its wine, so what would be the Gemar Melacha Aviv? Depressing it. The pressing it. And now what? And now you separated Truma prior to pressing it. The making olives into oil, grapes into wine, is a serious malacha. So the Gemara says, Divrei hakol mutar. No one will be of the opinion that Truma will be so potent that it's going to obligate you to separate everything else. And if not, you can't even snack. Why not? Because it's so loy nigmar malachton, the work is considered such serious work. That's the rule. You can eat aray. Eating aray is not a problem. And look, it's a given. It's like a svara. We're not even debating this. If it's before pressing. In other words, we're looking to find a scenario where the steps that are needed, let me use these words, are relatively minor steps. And let's get used to the way Chazal think, however they saw minor. Ella kinan kaiman, what is the case? Where is the case of the machlekes? Here's his example. So we couldn't use the figs, but we can use other items that are planned to be processed more, which would be, as an example, tomorrow, dates. Dates were also pressed into that round cake that's called groigeris, or the dates that are going to be beaten into the barrel, which who asid ledushan. Either ledoiris, doiris begregeris is to make it into the round cake, or to be dosh, which would mean to beat it into the barrel, which will be two ways that you are planning to preserve it or to keep it, and you didn't do it yet. You did not do that final step. Here is where Rabbi Eliezer Omer that if you were toidim truma tevelas beperis achaloi nigmar malachtan, because the act of doirisit, the act of doshit, is considered a relatively minor act. We can see that it's much less difficult than squeezing the grapes into juice. And the Rabbanan say no. Since even though the dates could be eaten right now, don't forget that. Elama, you're planning to make another step, to make it into a cake. The Chachamim say, since you intend to make it into a cake, there's no Gemar Malacha. Even though remember that the Chachamim are moide by Yakalkala Shalta Einim. Okay. Truma is koivas. The Gemara now is asking whether my sedishan is koivas. Frek the Gemara inquires the Gemara Rishoin ma'u sheyitboil. Now, hold on. If you follow the Seder Aviv, you only separate my sedishan after you separated Truma. So in that case, there's no question. Who cares if Rishoin is going to be koivas? It's already kavua. Why? Because you took off Truma. The person went out of the order. By the way, that could have been an answer. But since going out of the order is a biblical violation, the Gemara doesn't like to have a discussion regarding someone who did something wrong, even though there are places where we do have that discussion. What do we do now? But the Gemara here is not going to accept that. Go to Daf Tezayin Amud Beis. That's the meaning of the question, man non kaimen. What are we talking about? If we're talking about that someone made the meruach, just for the record, once you make the meruach, then you're chayiv to be toidem umaaser. Going out of the order at this point is aser doiraisa because you made the meruach, even if you're taking it home. You made the meruach, toidem umaaser, and you can't go out of the order. So for you to take off my sedition, vada, you took off truma. Since you took off truma is kaveya. Even according to the Chachamim, once there's Gemar Melacha and you separate Truma, that's one of the Shisha Devarim. So that cannot be the question. So what do you mean whether my sedition is going to be Koiveya? It already had the Kviyus. It must be that you didn't take off Truma. If you didn't take off Truma, we have to be speaking about a case where it didn't have Gemar Melacha. So now we already are learning in between the lines of the Yerushalmi to get what we're saying over here, that when am I obligated to separate the Trumas U'Maisres al HaSeder after the Gemar Melacha? Prior to the Gemar Melacha, first of all, I don't have to do anything. And if I went out of the order, I'm not violating. Now, how many steps prior? See, now you get the Hemshech of the Gemara. The Gemara wants to know whether my sedition is like Truma. We just said that even Truma, if a significant type of work still needs to get done, even Truma is not koiveya. So how many steps back are we from the meruach? In b'maiser rishoin that you separated without even separating Truma. But you did it bishibalin, that's called shehigdimoi bishibalin, when the kernels are still in the ears, they're still in the shaft. That means you have to thresh it, you have to winnow it, there are many steps ahead. Here, again, there's nothing to ask. First of all, you did no sin. You did no sin by going out of the Seder because the isur of the obligation of following the order is only after the Gemar Melacha. But there's another thing. Ma'aser Rishon, you're asking whether it's like Truma. Okay, let's say it's like Truma. If someone were to separate Truma Bishibalin, it won't be Koiveya. It's like separating Truma from the olives before you turned it into oil. Doesn't do anything. Divrei Hakol. Divrei Hakol Mutter. Oh, so Ella, Ki, non Kaiman. So find me a scenario where there are few steps left, but you were allowed to separate Ma'aser Rishon before you separated Truma. Ki non Kaiman. Let's go back to the case that we gave before, the case of the Truma, that you have tomorrow, you have dates. But now the Gemara has a beautiful chap. When you harvested the dates, your kavana was to be doidesit, either to press it into the cake, or you have groigeris, you had the dried figs, not fresh figs as kalkala. You had dried figs. You plan to beat it into the barrel. Okay. Now I'll go more than that. So what do we have over here? We have a product. Shaloi nigman malachton. What do the chachamim hold if you take off truma? What do the chachamim hold? That truma is not koiveya. Now we accomplished what we're looking for. We're just looking for someone taking off Ma'aser Rishon without doing a sin. He didn't do a sin. Truma was taken off. The hifresh truma gedoyla. Again, lichachamim. The truma gedoyla is not koiveya. Why not? Because you still have to do a step. It's a minor step. Fine. The Rabbi Eliezer, the Chachamim argue.
Why is it even accepted as Ma'aser Rishon if you haven't completed anything?
We're not there yet. We're not there. The Truma will be effective. It's going to be holy, but the Truma won't be Koiveya. Now hold on. You can't just say, and you took off Ma'aser Rishon, because just like the Chachamim say, that Truma, Shaloi Nigman Malachton, is not Koiveya. Even if Ma'aser Rishon is like Truma, so what? It won't do anything. Now the owner changed the intention. Beautiful. Now the owner says, you know what? I'm not going to go and press it into a cake. I'm going to eat it the way it is. The nimlach lahanichon k'moy shehem. And now, 1 second, and now he doesn't have to take off a new Truma Gedoyla. The Truma Gedoyla that he took off, regardless if he was going to make new steps or not, that it's effective. The item is not tevel letruma gedoyla, and now the hifresh mehen rishon. And for the record, the taking of Ma'aser Rishon is kahalacha kemitzvah. I took off truma gedoyla. I took off Ma'aser Rishon. How great is it? Ma'aser Sheni or Ma'aser Ani? And now I want to know whether the owner lechachamim. What's Rabbi Eliezer? The truma already was kaveyat. The chachamim hold the ground. It was Achal Nigman Malachton. Ma'aser Rishon would not have been different, but the guy changed his kavana. Now it's Nigman Malachton. So, and now what did he take off? Ma'aser Rishon. According to the Chachamim, is the owner allowed to snack on it prior to him taking off either the Ma'aser Sheni in the first or second year, or the Ma'aser Ani in the third year? Gavaldik. And now the Gemara further explains what this question implies. Because which is in Tamar lemafreya nitbelu, when the owner changes his kavana, then one can say, there's one way of looking at it. Now it became revealed that when the truma was taken off, la'achar shenigman malachtan. Don't forget, he's not doing anything anymore. So he had these dates. He was planning to press it into a cake. And then he took off Truma Gedoyla. All he did right now was, you know what? I'm going to eat it the way it is. One might have argued, now that he is intending to eat it the way it is, this may retroactively determine that the Truma was la'achar shenigman malachton. V'haraya, he's not doing anything anymore. And then there is no place to inquire if Ma'aser Rishon is going to be koiveya or not, because it's already there was already a kavius from the fact that you took off the truma. Because if we would say that your intention goes back retroactive, then again there's nothing to inquire. But we don't say that. We don't say that. Your intention is very significant. You know, we don't say the fact that you changed your mind today is haraya, that's what you always really had in mind. We don't say that. But the in Tamer Mekanu Lahaba, the in Tamer is what we're saying. We don't say it's Lamafreya. So when you took off the Truma, you took off Truma on a product, Shaloi Nigmar Malachtan. This is beautiful. So the Truma was not Koiva'as Lechachamim. Now this person took off Meiser and Kedin. And now there is a place to inquire, is Meiser Rishon like Truma? And b'meila you can't have even Arai, or maybe not. Maybe the act of taking off Meiser Rishon is not as potent as the act of taking off Truma. Rishon hu shuhu toivel, maybe, maybe not. It's amazing how much effort we made not to resolve the inquiry, to establish the inquiry. And now the mission is achieved, and now we can leave the inquiry unanswered. Being that we have a few minutes, and it's going to get more exciting as we go along. So now we're going to go, let's start learning Daf Yud Zayin, at least to open up the new topic. And this, let's go back, Chevre, to our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Let's go now let's go back now to Mekach. We're moving on to the second topic in the Mishnah. And what did we have in the Mishnah? The rule, right, of Rabbi Yehuda, right? We had Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. What did Rav Meir say? Rav Meir says, Divrei Rav Meir, that he was the one that introduced the din of Mekach. And from the way we just brought this up, from the case that Rav Meir gave, is that Shimon bought 5 figs from Reuven when the figs were still mechuber to the tree. Reuven picked it for the buyer. So Rav Meir says that's Mekach. The buyer cannot even nash on it. He bought it. He has to take off all the trumas or maisris. Rabbi Yehuda was the one that was machadesh. It depends whether there were 2 or less. 1, 1, 1. Mekach will not establish. Now listen to this. Says the Braisa. This is a Braisa. Halikeach tamarim. Let's go to the same thing. You bought dates, and your plan was to v'hu asid l'darsim. Or again, the same case that we just had. You had groigeris, you had the dried figs that you plan not to leave it the way it is, to pack it into a barrel, a dushan. You bought it. This is what you bought. So what did Rav Meir teach in the Mishnah? That's what Rav Meir taught in the Mishnah. The fact that Rav Meir gave a case that you bought it when it was still, you bought it from the guy from the tree, that means Rav Meir is saying that Mekach, the second of the Rambam, Shisha Devarim, does not need Gemar Melacha. Even though there's no Gemar Melacha, nevertheless, Mekach, Asur Loichal Mehem Arai. And now comes a bomb. Okay, so what do you need to do, Aviv? If I'm not allowed to eat it, even Arai, I have to take off all of the tithings. No, says Rabbi Meir, Umesaknan Demai. All I need to do is to take off the Demai separations. Now, why do all I need to do is take off that? This is Gavaldik. So look inside the Rashirilio. Second line from the right, third line from the right top. Asur Lechmem Arai. First of all, the Sfira like Rav Meir, Gabi Mekach. Beautiful, guys. Like Rabbi Eliezer Betruma. That what? That just like Truma is so powerful, even actually Nigmara Malachtan Truma is Keveya, Mekach is Keveya, actually Nigmara Malachtan. That's step number 1. Step number 2, now comes the Chiddush, with 5 lines from the top in the Rashirilio. Umesaknan only Demai. Why? Listen to this. Because the Eimer, Am Haaretz, Lo Yehoya Badata L'Darsan. Because when I buy figs or dates that could be eaten as they are, when I buy them, even though I am planning to do other steps with them, so there's no Gemar Melacha, the buyer who's a chaver is allowed to assume that mitzad the owner, in the owner's mind, there was already a Gemar Melacha. And more than that, maybe it entered the home of the owner. After Gemar Melacha, triggers Tevel Vade, Koveya Lamasros. For sure, if the owner planned to sell it, you don't even eat the Iyas Pnei Habayis. No, it's in the mind of the seller, could be there was a Gemar Melacha. So the buyer, the chaver, can assume that the seller felt you have to tithe it. The seller tithed it. Nevertheless, then he's an Amaretz. Since he's an Amaretz, I can't fully rely on him. So I have the leniency. On one hand, Rav Meir is machmer that even though the buyer plans to do another step, so from the buyer's perspective, there's no gemar melacha. Mekach is koiveya, even though there's no gemar melacha. Chumrah. Mitzat sheni, the lokeach can say, since he bought something that's edible, the seller saw this as a finished product, and the seller was toidem u'ma'aser. The problem is the Chachamim told me, Bisman Bayesheni, I can't fully rely on him. Say that. That's Rav Meir. The Chachamim oimrim, oichel mehem arai. But on the other hand, when I'm going to be toidem, I have to be misaknon vadai. Look inside that Asher Ilyo. 6 lines from the top, the right column. On one hand, oichel mehem arai, because the Chachamim hold like the Chachamim of our Mishnah by Truma, which is now the Rambam's psak, that what? The ein mekach toivel ella bedavar shenigmar malachtoi. There's no gemar malacha. There's no riyas pnei habayis. And that's the word. We don't say the guy bought it to press it. So the Chachamim say the seller did not view it as a gemar malacha. When I sell you a product and I know what you're doing with the product and I know that you are going to be doing another step, I'm happy. I'm making a sale. I'm looking at this. This is something that's not ready yet. I'm off the hook. Why would I be trying to I did nothing. Now, there's a leniency of the Chachamim that the buyer, until when he presses it into the cake, the buyer is allowed to snack. Mekach, actually, nigma manachnon is nothing. But when he presses it in, he can never say, the owner was toidem u'ma'aser, elamai, he's an amoritz. He did nothing. And now he has to be misaken vada. He has to take off all the trumos u'maisres. Beautiful. To be
Shouldn't there be like a standard what a mecher has done? I mean, this guy's he's a store selling figs or dates, whatever it is. Like either he does it or he doesn't do it.
In part of this brisa is, will the intention of the buyer, is the intention of the buyer going to be that which classifies the item? The Chachamim hold it does. And therefore, the seller doesn't feel that he's chayv to be toidem u'ma'aser.
Okay, but I just say it seems strange. Either produce is normally sold, that it's already
I'm
fixed,
sure,
or
Danny,
it's not
that
sold as fixed.
when the dates are pressed into a cake, he charges more money. More work, more money. When someone buys it at this earlier stage and they're getting a discount, they're paying less money. L'chachamim, the owner says, it's not finished yet. I'm giving you a discount because there's still more work to be done. Why should I be trying to mumas?
Yeah.